Equa. Okay, so good evening to everyone here at Sophia, where minds meet online. This evening we're going to meet three geniuses: Ludwig van Beethoven, Arthur Rubinstein, and Henrik Schering. At Wikipedia, if you look up Ludwig van Beethoven, this is what it says. Ludwig van Beethoven, baptized 17 December 1770 or 71, died March 26, 1827. Was a German composer and pianist. Is considered to have been the most crucial figure in the transitional period between the classical and romantic eras in Western classical music, and remains one of the most famous and influential composers of all time. Born in Bonn, then the capital of the Electorate of Cologne and a part of the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation, in present-day Germany, he moved to Vienna in his early 20s and settled there, studying with Joseph Haydn and quickly gaining a reputation as a virtuoso pianist. By the way, what they don't say here, he was also a pupil for a very short period of time of Mozart, who said, "This guy is a real genius, not like me." But anyhow, let's go back to Wikipedia. His hearing began to deteriorate in the late 1790s, yet he continued to compose, conduct, and perform even after becoming completely deaf. Well, wouldn't that be a great way to bury a man? Take his high and low points, put them into a magic hat, shake it well, and roll them out. And what do you get? You get nothing. You get a couple of words that are transparent, that don't have any substance. Leonard Bernstein, always the curious, always asking the questions to which he refuses any and all answers, in his first and delightful book, The Joy of Music, after he highlights all the elements that Beethoven did not excel in, like melody, harmony, lyricism, rhythm, counterpoint, and orchestration, etc., 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 he goes on to sum up by saying, he talks about Beethoven, he has the real goods, the stuff from heaven, the power to make you feel the finish. Something is right in the world. There is something that checks throughout, that follows its own law consistently, something we can trust, that will never let us down. Do you feel that it sounds like a definition of God? Well, I guess it was meant to be. Arthur Rubinstein. He did not go deaf, but his eyesight was very, very poor, and it's not very well known that in later life he was completely blind. Yet he continued to perform all over the world. Excuse me. And he said, on stage, I will take a chance. There has to be an element of daring in great music making. These younger ones, they are too cautious. They take the music out of their pockets instead of out of their hearts. A little personal anecdote, I think I told it in one of our sessions here. It so happened that I had the honor of filming Arthur Rubinstein in a movie about his life, which is called The Joy of Life. And he was an incredible showman, always very, very incredibly elegant. Even when I came in the morning to interview him before the movies, he was always with a silk gown and a silk handkerchief and always perfect. But one day I came, and as I was going up the stairs, that was in Paris, a woman in her, I don't know, late 60s or 70s, heavy woman, walks down the stairs as I walk them up, and I see Arthur Rubinstein opening his door, looking after her, and says, "Okay, I can't remember her name, so I will see you tomorrow." And she turns back and says, "Yes, maestro." So I come up and I ask him, after we talk, ask him, "Excuse me for my curiosity, but who was that lady?" And he says, "Why, she was my teacher." And I said, "Excuse me, maestro." Now, he was in his late 70s already. I You catch me by surprise. Do you still need the teacher? I can understand that you still need playing. And he looks at me surprised, and he says, "When I will not need a teacher anymore, it means that I am dead." He was born in Lodz in Poland in 1887, and he almost reached 100 years of age. He died at 95. He became one of the great pianists of the 20th century. Again, a terrible line to say one of the great pianists, because it means that you can compare one to the other, and you cannot. Rubinstein started at age 3, and within 5 years, he gave his first public performance. And he told me that the joy of the performance was much bigger than the joy of listening to the music, because he said he was so terrible talking about himself when he was 80 years old. When Rubinstein was 10, 2 years later, his mother took him to auditorium for the famous violinist Joseph Joachim, who was very impressed by the young boy's performance of Mozart. And I'll let you know that Mozart wrote some of his piano pieces, especially in a way that he would be the only one who could play them. So they were very, very difficult to play. Joachim was very, very impressed by the way Rubinstein performed Mozart, and he agreed to be responsible for his general and musical education. Arthur Rubinstein, by the way, told me that in his whole life, he does not believe that he spent one full year in a formal school. He studied mainly at home or at the home of Joseph Joachim. So his mother, leaving her son to study in Berlin, Rubinstein's mother returns to Lodz. He would never return to live with his family, and that's why he never went to school. Joachim, who remained the young Rubinstein close advisor, introduced him to Heinrich Barth, and it was under Barth's tutelage that Rubinstein made his first steps toward serious performance. He studied for 3 years in Germany and made his debut at the Beethoven Saal with the Berlin Philharmonic. He played works by Chopin, Schumann, Mozart, and some Camille Saint-Saëns, the Concerto No. 2 in G, which he would continue to play throughout his whole career. He was completely enamored with the piece, the Concerto No. 2 in G by Camille Saint-Saëns, and he told me that he had like 10 or more years where every morning he would wake up and play that for half an hour, again and again and again. And only that, after that, he felt ready for the day, and he took his coffee and went to take a shower. Similar stories I heard from Alfred Brendel, who told me that every morning he would wake up and play uh, again and again and again the Goldberg variations, the theme, and after half an hour of that, he would start running, come back, drink his coffee, take a shower, and start the day. Amazed by Rubinstein's performance, one critic wrote, even then, he played everything, not as a child prodigy, but as a mature adult musician. Another little story about Rubinstein, when he was 12 years old, already a confirmed concert pianist, he listened to the Adagio from the Schubert Quintet for Strings, and he said, this is exactly what I want for them to play at my funeral. That said when he was 12 years old. Rubinstein continued to play throughout Europe to rave reviews. 1906, he travels to New York to perform at Carnegie Hall. The reception is very cool. He told me that a lady came behind the curtains, came to the room, and told him, don't listen to them. They don't understand anything in music. You are great. You are fantastic. And she invited him. It came out that she was the sponsor of the Philharmonic of Philadelphia, and she invited him to perform in Philadelphia. And he said yes. And she says, I remember your concert from 20 years ago, again and again and again. And he didn't say anything, he told me. And then after the concert, where she was in tears and came to him and said, thank you, Maestro Anton, thank you. She took him to be Anton Rubinstein and not Arthur Rubinstein. Although Anton Rubinstein was about 40 years his senior, but anyhow, his tour of the United States was not a big success, and he only finished about 75% of the tour and came back. He returned to Paris. Rubinstein refrained from public appearance for 4 years. He told me that he was not in deep depression. He was in remittance. He decided to leave music and live the real life. And he had fantastic times with ladies, with the girls, with doing everything. But of course, I asked him, and did you play every morning Camille Saint-Saëns? And he looked at me again, surprised, and said, of course I played every morning Camille Saint-Saëns. Doesn't have anything to do with life. At the time, though, he was very, very poor, and he didn't have a place to sleep. And some other times, he lived among the cultured elite because he was a fantastic, incredible person of conversation. He could talk about everything, whether he knew what he was talking about, or, as he told me, he said, I was like a sponge. When people talked about something, for whatever reason, all of a sudden, I knew everything that they didn't say about the same theme. He said, I have no idea how I knew it, but when I said it, it looked as if I meant something serious. So he continued to practice and became friends with the big conductor Serge Koussevitzky, who would then later conquer the States, and also quite close to Igor Stravinsky, although, as he told me, it was impossible to be friends with Igor Stravinsky because Igor Stravinsky was friends with himself. There's a story about Igor Stravinsky. His mother comes to one of his concerts. His mother never took him seriously and was terrible to him all the time. And the concert finishes and everybody is ravishing about how fantastic it was and everything. And she talks to somebody without telling him that she is the mother of the composer and says, why can't he write music like Tchaikovsky? So that was Igor Stravinsky. And obviously another story about Igor Stravinsky is when he came to Paris and he started living in Paris, he was so meager and he was so sort of a miser that he would sit in a cafe, and when somebody would set up and pay and leave a tip, he would take that tip from the table. But anyhow, he wrote The Rite of Spring, and he wrote The Firebird, and he was an outstanding genius of music. 1914, with the beginning of World War I, Rubinstein leaves Paris for Spain, and he tours Spain. Although the years in Europe are terrible, Spain is like a little Garden of Eden. The war does not touch Spain. And he has a fantastic tour. That tour actually is a turning point in his life. He becomes a more and more mature and passionate pianist, and everything is different from the terrible concert at Carnegie Hall. The people of Spain respond to him enthusiastically, and while there, he learned Spanish and began to play the works of Manuel de Falla, Isaac Albéniz, and Enrique Granados. His playing was not the controlled and sedate playing of the traditional classical musicians, but it was wild. It was completely a Chopinist, if we can say it, a kind of player. So people were really encaptured and enamored with his passion, with his charisma, and not so much with virtuosity. By the way, I had the honor of listening to quite a few concerts by Maestro Arthur Rubinstein, and there was not one concert where he did not miss a note, play a note wrongly. And after, I don't know, 5 or 10 or whatever concerts, I found the courage and asked him, Maestro, you know that you played an F sharp instead of an F. And he looks at me and says, that's what the music wanted. I didn't play what is written. I played what the piano wanted me to play. And he started laughing like crazy. It was an incredible showman. So Rubinstein followed his visit to Spain with an equally well-received extended tour of South America. Now he was fluent in Spanish and the complete Latin lover and Latin gentleman. These performances gave him the money and encouragement to return to Europe and continue to perform. Once in Paris, he returned to the frenzied life. We have to remember that this is the change, the huge change that goes over Europe, 1917, 1918. We have to remember the incredibly powerful Austrian-Hungarian Empire is no longer. We start hearing about the Czech Republic. Janacek writes the huge music for the Czech Republic. Romania becomes a country that stands on its own. Not to talk about what happened in Russia. 500 years of Romanov ended in a bloodshed, and in 1917 it's declared a huge, nobody knew what it was going to be, but anyhow it was not going to be a czarship. He became very friendly with a lot of artists. He became very friendly with a sponsor of the arts, the famous Ingrid Stein. he became friends with Jean Cocteau, with Pablo Picasso, enjoyed the fantastic social life of the artist, but felt all the time that his own playing kind of stopped. He told me, I felt every time I went out of the house happy because I was going to meet all those fantastic people. And just before I came out of the door, I felt as if something hit me right in the face, and I understood. My music hit me because it was going nowhere, and it was trying to have me take it to some other place. So only when he was 40, in 1927, he met the daughter of the very famous at that time Polish conductor Emil Blianski. And although his daughter, Nela Miriansky, was almost 20 years younger, she was 22 at the time and he was 40, they were married in London in 1932. More than anything else, it was this relationship and the beginning of a family life that imposed upon Rubinstein a need to return to the rigors of study. And it's of the date of 1932 in July that he would never stop studying even one day if he was in one place. Sometimes he would go on long tours, so he had either found a teacher wherever he went to, or he had to play on his own, and he said he hated it. Soon after the first child was born, Rubinstein rents a small farmhouse and begins to practice 12, 16 hours a day, out of which at least 4 to 6 were done with either 2 or 3 teachers every day, because he said the teachers would get tired. They could not teach for more than 2 hours. So he was playing with teachers for 4 to 6 hours a day, and then kept on going for another 8 or 10 hours. Of course, a genius like Rubinstein had to find his revenge. So 1937, he is now 50 years of age. Rubinstein returns to Carnegie Hall, and he's just fantastic, and he conquers the world. It's been more than 30 years, and this time he was hailed as the genius never heard before. Nobody mistook him anymore for Anton Rubinstein. In his performance of Chopin, critics saw not only the master musician, but the revolutionary reinterpretation of the composer's work. Rubinstein realized that the growing threat of Nazi occupation would make his family in immediate danger, and that's why he relocated with his whole family to America, where he found a home in Los Angeles among a number of other European refugees. Among them were also Arnold Schoenberg, and many others who started working a lot as musicians, composers, teachers, and also started writing music for films. Not Arthur Rubinstein, of course. And he became a citizen in 1946, but he lived most of his later life again in Paris. He never found himself in the United States. After the war, and after he has lost all of his family in Lodz, he dedicated himself to performing publicly in support of the new state of Israel. And despite his age and failing health, Rubinstein, as I said before, continued performing throughout his 70s and 80s. In his late 80s, when I met him, he walked around the house and everywhere as if he saw everything. But he told me he was blind. He couldn't see anything. But he taught himself exactly the steps. By the way, a very similar story. is the story of Maria Callas. Maria Callas was almost blind, and in the rehearsals, I heard stories. And when she was rehearsing in the La Scala, she would come at night with her husband, who was completely, he was a very wealthy industrialist, but very much in love with Maria. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, they would come to the Scala, and without lights, she asked him to stand and give her the counting of what she was supposed to sing so that she could walk from one place to the other in darkness because she was blind. And so that she would never miss a cue of lighting during the performance. Now, I don't know how true it is, but I believe it was. I do know that she was almost blind. After he went completely blind, and here I'm talking again about Arthur Rubinstein, he finished his first biography, which he calls My Many Years. And 6 years later, he left his wife and married a younger wife. He moves to Geneva, although he's still traveling all the time. And his last 5 years he spent in Switzerland. Why? Because he believed, like Frank Sinatra later, like so many other people, that there is a special magic therapy to be found in Swiss herbs to rejuvenate the old man to be able to make love again, because his wife was much, much younger. She was almost close to 60 years younger than he was, and but he was the genius. His lifelong commitment to music and his extensive body of work remain an inspiration to classical music lovers around the world. And I'd like to just add Arthur Rubinstein, like all the geniuses, never played notes. Arthur Rubinstein always sang the music through the keys of the piano. Let me just go to the music itself to make sure that when we get there, we will be able to listen to it. Okay, 1, 2, and 3. Okay, and now we go back. And we get to Henryk Szerying, another Polish guy, although he has a kind of strange sounding name. His family, more anecdote with Arthur Rubinstein. Yeah, well, we will have many, many evenings with Arthur Rubinstein, and I'd be glad to tell, because every minute with a big man, with a great man, was incredible. By the way, he was 1 meter 68 centimeters, and when he walked into the hall onto the stage, he wanted, normally the orchestra will stand up when the soloist walks in. He did not allow anybody to stand up. He had the whole orchestra always sit down, as well as the conductor, complete darkness, and allow only one light to follow him. And as he got next to the conductor, all the lights came on. And as the conductor was on the podium higher than he, there was no big difference. He was a big, real grand viveur, loved everything that was beautiful, liked to eat everywhere, and always had this joy of life. Henryk Szerying also comes from a Jewish family, and he was born in Poland, but his family comes from Hungary and Bohemia of those years. He was born in right after the war, 1918, and lived to be 70, 1988. He wrote once, "To breathe is to want is to get is to give is to live is to love." He was born in Warsaw, a suburb called Zelacowa Wola, exactly in the same place where Chopin was born. He was born into a very wealthy family. His father was a highly successful industrialist who moved, by the way, to Poland because he had some factories in the northern part of Poland and wanted to be close to them. During the whole week, the father was never home. He was always in one of his factories. So he grew up with his mother, and his mother was the person who started. She was a pianist player and a pianist teacher, and she started teaching him the piano when he was 3 years old. Let's also put in mind the period of time that we're talking about, 3 years old, 1921, just before the Versailles treatment. You know what the Versailles Treaty did? The Versailles Treaty that put Germany down to its knees and, in a way, was the beginning of the big hatred of the Germans of everybody else, because they felt, in 1922, when the treaty was signed, Germany started going very, very deep into a depression. Terrible stories, people that would fill up a whole carriage with money in order to go and buy bread, and by the time they got to the bakery, it was not enough. People would kill horses in the street right out of the carriage and would eat the horse. It was terrible times. So here we have Henrik Szerying, a boy of 3, 1921, studies the music in a very rich, wealthy family, and it looks like as if nothing can go wrong. And when he was 7, somebody brings him a violin, and that's it. This will be his instrument. A friend of the family was a friend of Maurice Frankel, a very known teacher who was the assistant of Leopold Auer in St. Petersburg obviously before 1917, before the war. And although Frankel was perhaps the most influential teacher of young Henrik, the wonderfully disciplined training in matters both musical and technical came from Karl Flesch, who lived between 1973 and 1944, whose expertise virtually created and nurtured Szerying's immense talent between the years of 1930 and 1933. Flesch was the major musical force that influenced the boy. He was not a boy anymore, through his remarkable teaching approach. Should be mentioned that it was the famous Polish violinist Bronislaw Huberman, who, after hearing the 10-year-old Szerying play the Mendelssohn Concerto, 1928, let's remember what goes over music. And here we have Bronislaw Huberman has time to say to a 10-year-old Szerying, when he plays Mendelssohn Concerto, he convinces the parents that they should come and talk to the god. Karl Flesch was the god in violin teachers. By the way, in 1935, Excuse me, something happened to my computer. Go out. 1935, Bronislaw Huberman convinced Toscanini, by then very, very famous, very irrational, erratic, nervous, but a genius musician. He convinced him to come to Tel Aviv, of all places, and they stayed together for almost 4 months in Tel Aviv, 1934, between 1934 and 1935. And Toscanini was the one who opened the Philharmonic Orchestra Hall in Tel Aviv, and something there were a famous case. Somebody had twin girls, and one of them was called Tosca, and the other one was called Nini. And nobody in Tel Aviv understood why, but they never explained. Anyhow, to come back to our friend Szerying. Szerying was a genius in many, many things. He was completely fluent in, I don't know, some say 7, some say 8 languages. Doesn't really matter. He could read and write perfectly in at least 7 languages. He is of that kind of genius of the ex-Austro-Hungarians who were also incredibly exposed to people from all over the world. And at home, people would talk Russian, Polish, German, French, Hungarian. And he then opened up to English and Spanish. He became a citizen of Mexico later. He was a diplomat. Now he comes to study under Jacques Thibault, a real gentleman, a French gentleman, which is something else of those years of a Polish gentleman. And he starts working under the coaching of Gabriel Billon, and Szerying becomes associated with the French school of violin playing, a very, very fine school, Courtauld later. The studies with them led to his graduation from the Paris Conservatoire with the coveted first prize in 1937. 1933, Szerying made his debut as a concert artist playing the Brahms concerto. Some said that he could have done it already 8 years earlier, right? Because he was too old, he was already 15 years of age, 1933, the year that Schubert broke his voice and couldn't sing in the child choir anymore, and he sat back and composed his first fragment of a trio. This is his first concert where he plays Brahms concerto. His turnout was so highly successful that an excessive concert tour followed immediately in spite of his ongoing studies and in spite of the beginning of what we know. In Italy, we already have almost 5 years of Mussolini. In Germany, 1933 is the collapse of the Weimar Republic. Hitler is elected. And it's very important to keep all those things in proportion in order to understand how a genius can grow, develop, and become very much at home in a world that goes completely crazy and out of any kind of sense. In Paris, there's the legendary Nadia Boulanger, an incredible teacher to whom, by the way, a much older Arthur Rubinstein would come, and he did a whole big thing he put himself completely to the floor and he kissed the floor under her feet, asking her to teach him. He was already very well known. I'm talking about Arthur Rubinstein. Nadia Boulanger was also much later teacher of geniuses like as late as Leonard Bernstein. She was his guide. She taught him counterpoint and composition and introduced him to personalities like Heitor Villa-Lobos, who was at that time in Paris. He did not live in Brazil at that time. Alfred Cortot, the fantastic violinist, Manuel Ponce, Igor Stravinsky again, and a big new world was opened when he met Maurice Ravel. Maurice Ravel, who always said that it's a pity that the only piece that made him famous was a piece that had everything but for music, and he was obviously talking about the bolero. At the outbreak of World War II, what was the date? September 1st, 1939. He was appointed a liaison officer and interpreter because he spoke. I found in one place they said 8 languages. I knew 7. I gave him one more language. I'm not sure. There's a hotel today in London that used to be the headquarters of the Polish government in exile, led by General Sikorski. And in that hotel, they kept a room with a lot of papers of the time. And there's quite a lot about Szerying, not as a violinist, but as a diplomat and as a translator. He served in that capacity until 1945, having given well over 300 concerts for the Allied troops in Europe, Africa, and in both Americas. 1942, he joins the exiled Polish premier, this time in Mexico. The premier was in search of a home in Latin America for about 4,000 Polish refugees who were displaced by the war and couldn't come back. And it was Mexico that finally accepted these desperate and homeless people. And Henrik Szerying was so moved by this humanitarian gesture that he returned to Mexico in 1943. He was offered the post of director of the string department at the National University of Mexico so that he could reorganize the Mexican violin school. And a little bit later, in 1948, he was granted the Mexican citizenship. I dedicate a lot of time to Szerying because he was really a genius and outstanding violin player who is not very well known today. And he was really like Chrysler, like Cortot. Szerying was one of the most resourceful violinists in history of recording, with a recording career that spanned over more than 40 years. It was Szerying who rediscovered and was the first to record Paganini's Third Violin Concerto. Chavez, the Mexican concerto, the Cuban concertos by Schonka, the violin concertos by Manuel Ponce, Benjamin Lis, Camargo, Guarnieri, and, of course, Jean Martinon, the Poema Concertante by Javier Monsalvatque, and composers like Carrillo, Roman Haubenstock, Ramati, Peter Racine Fricke, and José Savre Marroquin. Those are just a few of the composers who sometimes wrote their pieces especially for Szerying. They were part of a vast program repertoire. He was told, it was told that he had a repertoire that could fill about 40 hours of concert, which is quite incredible. Another little thing, he always played the violin with his eyes wide open and never with notes. And a young Herbert von Karajan conducted the Berlin Philharmonic Concerto in a Brahms, and Szerying was the soloist. They both did not have the score. They did not have the music in front of them, and the concerto begins, and Szerying has his head turned down with closed eyes, and his violin is hanging by his side, and Mr. von Karajan has his eyes big open, his hands lifted up, and then as the music begins and Karajan lifts the baton, Karajan closes his eyes and keeps them closed until the end of the concert. And of course, Szerying opens his eyes, lifts his head, looks directly into the public and to the audience, and plays incredibly. He would call, among friends, he would call Herbert von Karajan the blind genius. He was not blind, but he always conducted with his eyes closed. He received many honors, the Grand Prix du Disque 6 times, the Grammy Award, the Edison, the Golden Record, the Wiener Flötenuhr, and the Golden Medal of the cities of Paris and Jerusalem. He had a very close relationship with Jerusalem. He would later donate one of his violins to Teddy Kollek, the mayor of Jerusalem, the city of gold. In addition to all this, he received the Order of Polonia Restituta. I don't think I have to translate it. I believe you understand. The Commendatore della Repubblica of Italy. He was made an officer of the Crown of Belgium and commander of the Order of Alfonso X el Sabio of Spain. By the way, great sponsor of arts. He wrote music, King Alfonso el Sabio, Alfonso the Wise. He received the Cross of an Officer of the French Légion d'Honneur and the Gran Premio Nacional de Mexico and Commander's Cross of Orders of St. Charles of Monaco. And many, many more. He had a huge collection of violins because as soon as his father found out that he had the genius at home, the first thing he did, he bought him a Guarnerius del Gesù, which today would cost something like $5 to $6 million. He gave his collection of violins in his lifetime to Prince Ranieri of Monaco, to Teddy Kollek, as I said, to some of his students, mainly to Shlomo Mintz, famous young violinist, an Israeli young violinist, who studied under him and received his famous Guarnerius del Gesù from 43, called Le Duc, and the Pierre Hef he also gave to him. There was a copy of Le Roi Joseph that was built by Guarnerius del Gesù. So Henrik Szerying was a great musician, a diplomat, a pedagogue, and a philanthropist. He gave a lot of money to a lot of causes, and he died suddenly in the middle of a tour in Germany. Everybody was waiting in Kassel, and the impresario had to go on stage and say, "I'm terribly sorry, but Maestro Henrik Szerying just expired." The program of his last performance was the same as his very first concert 55 years earlier, the famous violin concerto by Brahms, which was one of his pezzi forti. No? This is also what he played under a young from Karajan. And here, finally, we get to the music. This here, as you see, is the cover of the CD. Actually, it came out originally as a 33 and was remastered on the CD. And let's talk a little bit about the piano and violin sonata, number 5. Actually, Beethoven did not say piano and violin sonata, he said violin sonata. Then in F major, opus 24, which Beethoven called the Spring. So this is one of the rather few pieces that Beethoven wrote in 4 movements. Many of his pieces were written in 3 movements. He wrote the piece between 1800 and 1801. He was a great lover of nature and was particularly happy and inspired when in the forest under the stars he could just walk and feel completely free. The presence of God for him was reinforced by the beauty of nature. It was a very quite a special character because he believed in freedom, he believed in the greatness of the spirit of humanity, he believed in progress, yet he was a firm believer that there must be, as he said, a genius conductor to everything, God. This tender side of his, the bucolic, romantic, and gentle, contrasts incredibly with what is known about his character. He was completely different. He was extremely dynamic and extremely tense all the time and emotional, and his aura was terrible. It was always dark. It was a stupid joke that I remember was told when I was a child. You know who inspired Beethoven? And the answer is, of course, no. And then they would say it was the dame that came every morning to clean for him, and he didn't have money to pay her. So she came in with the coffee, and she said, "Well, maestro, what about paying me?" And he says, "Not today, not today. I'll pay you tomorrow." And she goes, "Ha ha ha ha!" So this was his inspiration. Terrible joke. Anyhow, Leonard Bernstein, in the book that I told before, The Joy of Music, said about the genius of Beethoven that he had that inexplicable ability to know exactly what the next note had to be. And certainly every time that we listen to Beethoven, we are aware that this is a composer who is very conscious, very present, every count of his music, and he knows exactly what he's doing. There's always an incredible combination of sureness of musical direction and a complete submission to some higher power. Call it God, call it inspiration, call it genius, whatever it is, he had it. Beethoven music is, without doubt, miraculous and divine, godly. Therefore, it is not possible to imitate his music. It is always distinctive, uncontested, and it has its own class. Beethoven was so enamored with his own music that when I was younger and I listened to Beethoven, I had a feeling that he didn't know how to finish a piece, because at the end of a piece, Beethoven would always go again and again and again and again, and then when you thought it was all over, he would start again and then build up again and again and again. And sometimes, I'm talking about 78 giri per minuto, I would lift up the needle and try to finish the piece before Beethoven finished it, and I understood that it just needed those repetition of again and again and again and again. A string sonata, the Opus 24, is the fifth of Beethoven's 10 sonatas for piano and violin. As I say, he called it a violin sonata. He did not call it the piano sonata. Some said because he did not want to push himself. He was a piano player, virtuoso, but it's not true because he didn't have a problem pushing himself or not pushing himself. He wrote it between 1800 and 1801. It was dedicated, along with the sonata in A minor, Opus 23, to one of Beethoven's most generous Viennese patrons, Count Moritz von Fries. Both sonatas were originally intended to be paired as Opus 23 number 1 and 23 number 2, but through the fault of the engraver, the printer, as you told me the other day, the friends of yours who l'impaginatori, so the mistakes go back to 1800, and because he made a mistake, we now have the spring Opus 24. Beethoven wanted it to be Opus 23 number 1, 23 number 2. It's one of the most popular Beethoven's sonata, and I think it's difficult to find a better composition of geniuses than Rubinstein, Szerying, and Beethoven. The music is full of joy, it's refreshing, it's hopeful, it's full of qualities that make the subtitle Spring very appropriate, although it's not Beethoven who gave it the title. Beethoven did not give it a title. Throughout, the melodies are immediate, simple, and elegant. Also humorous moments. It's reminding listener that Beethoven was a master of fun and games as well, although his jokes were always very dark jokes and always not nice. As I said before, it's one of the only 3 of Beethoven piano and violin sonatas to be cast in 4 movements. The others are the number 7, the Opus 30, number 2, and number 10, Opus 96. It opens with one of the most unforgettable melodies of all times, played in F major by the violin. You'll listen to the incredible humbleness of Maestro Rubinstein when he kind of rolls out a red carpet for Szerying to come in with the melody. The second theme, which follows immediately, is more rhythmic and more energetic. And the movement develops around the 2 contrasting themes. It's like a confrontation. The slow movement in B flat major speaks simply and flowingly, and the violin and piano alternate in presenting the theme in slightly varying, such a different variations all the time. Now we come to the third movement, a scherzo and trio, and it's like a game of tag. Now, somebody runs away and the other one catches him up. Somebody runs away and the other one catches him up. And this is what happens in the third movement. and the violin, the piano bounce off each other, and it's like a coquettish impression, and it's strengthened by the rhythm of playfulness and really incredible joy. It's bucolic, and the finale in is a rondo with a very lyrical theme, although, as Bernstein says, if you want lyricism, talk about Janacek and not about Beethoven, but here Beethoven is very lyrical, and it's followed by three episodes. Light-hearted, very spontaneous, its dotted rhythms exemplify Beethoven's inventiveness and his sense of humor. Now, today we will listen to movement number one, the Allegro, and movement number two separately, and number three and four we will listen together. So, shall we allow Maestro Rubinstein and Maestro Szerying to call to mind again the genius of Ludwig van Beethoven, Sonata number 5, Opus 24 in F major, also called the Spring Sonata. Now is the time when, if you want to cough or sneeze or turn on your cellular phones, you have a couple of minutes when we go from the first to the second movement, which is Adagio ma molto espressivo. Again, time for coughing, and we're going to go now for the scherzo allegro molto and the end piece, the rondo allegro ma non troppo. Rondo, as you know, was a kind of a dance where the gentlemen would come from one side and the ladies from the other side, and they would meet and start going round and round and round. It's originally from Napoli, Napoletano, il rondo, that would later come into the world of music through Venice, not through the rondo veneziano, which came much later, of course, but it came to be known through the Venice Carnival. So we'll hear the scherzo, allegro molto, the movement number 3, and the rondo, allegro ma non troppo, which will end up the string sonata number 5 in F major, opus 24. Not to forget Beethoven, Szerying, and Rubinstein. That was String Sonata number 5 in F major, Opus 24. Ludwig van Beethoven wrote it between 1800 and 1801. By the way, he was completely deaf by the time he wrote it, completely. He could only hear. Sometimes he would take a violin. He was not a violinist, he was a pianist, but he had to play everything he wrote, so he played the violin. And in order to hear it, he would ask somebody close to him to knock on his head if the tone did not seem right. And of course, if anybody dared touching his head, he would bite his hand. But he was completely deaf when he wrote it. So the joy and the bucolic allegro that we hear in this is all of genius, somewhere very, very human, but it's the points where humanity does not have to invent God. It's within the humans. So at this point, again, thank you very much for being here with us at T Sofia, where minds meet online. And we hope to see you again with us this Saturday. We start a new series with Herzog, Soul Bellows Herzog. And we will do one Saturday Soul Bellow and one Saturday Albert Camus. And Soul Bellow will be dedicated completely to the book Herzog, whose beginning lines are, if everybody thinks that I'm crazy, it's okay with me, thought Moses Herzog. That's the beginning of the book. Moses Herzog is in a huge house in the middle of the Berkshire, somewhere in Massachusetts. He shares his food with rats and mice. This is a man who had a brilliant academic career, was the lover and beloved of women, and who comes to a point in his life where he needs to have a lot of things to share with others. So he writes letters to everybody he knows, and then he writes letters to everybody who is famous and a celebrity, presidents, people of the church, artists. And then, once all those are finished, he starts writing to the famous dead. So, Herzog, A Life Told Through Letters, will start Saturday. Next Tuesday will be again with our friend Schubert in a Schubertiade. And yes, just a second. And Wednesday we have a very special evening with Tamar Halperin, a keyboard artist, who will tell us music, a love story. Yes, Cornelia, just a second. Here you are.
Yes, I was just wondering if we can have some text for Herzog.
Yes, I'll try to make it available.
I mean, just like scanning or something, because I don't have it. I don't remember seeing it in Romanian.
What we'll do in the evening themselves, I'm not sure that I can find something on the internet. I'm not going to have time to scan my book. But what we'll do is I'll read very many passages in it.
Mm-hmm.
And also through Sophia, You can buy books through Amazon either in France or in Germany or in the UK or Canada or the States. Any place where they have the book in your language. I don't know exactly. They don't sell to all the countries, but that's why we have their representation from Germany, France, UK, and the US. By the way, in Israel, it's almost impossible to buy from, not almost, it's impossible to buy from some books from the UK, and impossible to buy music from the United States, from Amazon. I have no idea why. It's commercial laws or something, anyhow. So I will read quite a lot of it. It's a book I really love. I know quite a lot of it by heart, but I will make it a joyful and pleasant duty to read quite a lot from the book, and we'll have a possibility to talk about it. I'd be very happy to know how you come along with your ambition and wish to translate your Italian historian, and I hope the book week is going to come and go and that we will all survive. And I hope to see you on Saturday. Good evening.
Good
And thank you again.